people misunderstand this argument from our side as saying that we don't think there's such thing as calories, that energy in, energy out doesn't exist or doesn't apply. It does. That's not, let's start with that. There is a thing called energy in and out, energy out in the body. We're not a closed linear system like thermodynamics laws. We're dynamic open systems. So it's a little bit different. And my point is, you can't use the calorie model to even come close. You can try. It doesn't work, because every time they do big studies and they add X amount of calories that should get X amount of weight or fat or whatever it is, it never adds up. It just doesn't. And when they do the same thing reducing, it doesn't add up, because it's almost impossible to be accurate. I'm not talking just a few calories off. We're talking hundreds, sometimes 1,000 calories a day, easily, with the best of intention, weighing your food and knowing what you're doing.
So why is that the calories in versus calories out approach flawed? What are some of the big flaws with the people following that? And there's so many that follow it, Don.
Well, there's basically two sides to that story. One, the calorie concept itself. Again, we're not saying that there's no such thing as a calorie or the energy doesn't matter coming in, coming out. But that calorie is a measurement of potential energy. Okay? And so the way it's calculated, there's an automatic buffer zone in there, because it's done in a laboratory. It's done in a very controlled environment, in an oven with measurements and things like that. That doesn't represent our body. So 4 calories out of a carb, for example, could be 5 in reality, could be 3 in reality. There's 25% buffer in there. And so if you're trying, and same thing with protein, same thing with fat, then there's alcohol. It's got 7 calories, right? That's a big one. And then there's a prioritization of which one gets burned first. So all of that taken into consideration, it's really almost impossible to accurately count calories in your meals. Even if you measure it, even if you have done this for years and you're following a number, you're going to be off. You could be, most likely you're off with too many, but you can be off with too few as well in your calculation. So the entire equation is inaccurate. So that's my problem number one with calories. And number two is our bodies aren't a linear system. Okay, that's what the laws of thermodynamics talk about, a closed linear system.
Right.
Our body is an open dynamic system that has a lot of variables. And when you're talking about weight loss or weight gain, muscle loss or muscle gain, you're talking about hormonal state more than caloric state. Okay, so your body is a demand-driven machine. It's not a supply-driven machine. What that means is, just because you give it something doesn't mean it's going to do what you want. I could take 300 grams of protein, 3 meals a day of the best in the world. In a year, I'm not going to look like a bodybuilder just by that, right? I've tried it, doesn't work, right? So you have to create the demand, and you do that by your lifestyle. You do that by your hormonal status. Hormones trump calories every single time. And so if you're in a state of growth or fed state, which means you're eating and insulin goes up and mTOR goes up, those are big ones, then you're going to be breaking down and storing, not eating, not using, right? Breaking down and storing. You actually break down muscle when you eat, as you eat protein, right? Very interesting thing. It starts to break everything down, because your body can't be in 2 different systems, right? As you eat, it has to break it all down. And so your body goes into breakdown mode. When you stop, and that's insulin and mTOR. And then when you stop that switches over to repair mode. And that's when things dissipate out and your liver starts to release things into the system, nutrients more, and you start to absorb them and use them. Okay, that's when fat burning can happen, and that's where muscle building can happen. It's a separate state. Okay, fed versus repair, or growth versus repair, however you want to look at it. They're opposing. You can't have them both at the same time. And so when you're trying to think about weight loss, you think about calories, hormones trump calories. So if insulin's there, it doesn't matter what those macronutrients are, you're in that state. You're in the fed state, and you can't do repair. That's all there is to it. And so calories are trumped by hormones, and hormones dictate whether we're building or breaking down in the body and what's going on.
So hormones are more important than calories. And when we talk about the fat storage hormones we have in the body, out of the 600 plus hormones in the body, Don, how many of them store fat?
Pretty much there are some that argumentatively store fat, but really it's insulin. Mm-hmm. Insulin, because fat storage is energy conservation. That's all it is.
Survival mechanism.
What?
A survival mechanism, essentially.
Yeah. Your body doesn't care what you look like, right? It cares that we have. Body doesn't waste a thing. I see people when they talk about fasting say, "Oh, your body dumps minerals." Your body doesn't dump anything ever, right? Your body recycles. When you're in the repair state, your body recycles. Just think of autophagy as recycling. Forget the big word and what it means. The autophagy process is a recycling process. For example, when you're eating, people like to count how many proteins they're eating, how many grams and stuff like that. I don't get into that. I say you need a lot less than people say, and they get all over me. The reality is your body will recycle 700% more protein than you eat every day. What you eat actually contributes about 12.5% to your overall protein use of that day. It's a minor part. It doesn't need it. And when you get into the repair state, that recycling goes up with autophagy. And it starts to utilize things a lot more. And that's going on in the absence of insulin. Because when insulin goes on, it says, okay, store. We got stuff coming in. Let's get ready. We're going to store this. Okay, it's breaking. That's why it breaks it down. And so it stores it in form of glycogen in the liver and the muscles. And that can vary greatly between people. And an athlete, a competitive athlete, can have 4,000% more glycogen than someone who's sedentary. That's a lot. That's a lot of capacity, right? There's your glycogen capacity load. So that can vary. And then as that's going on, your body's insulin tells the fat cells to open up and bring it right in. Okay. And so if you will store fat as insulin goes, when you have that, when insulin's on the job, that's just what it does. And so insulin's important, mTOR is important, but you want it to be cyclic and fast cycles. Boom, fed, repair. Short fed, long repair. Short fed, long repair. Because everything that people think about in growth, like get bigger, stronger, faster, really happens in repair. Growth is, we're talking about babies. We're talking about pregnancy. We're talking about fat gain. And we're talking about tumors, to be honest, right? So insulin is the fat storing hormone. It controls the fed state, and it controls so many processes by doing it. That's the bottom line. And the other fat burning hormones that we can argue about, they all follow insulin anyway. Same thing with mTOR.
That's why you call insulin the bully of the block, because when insulin's around, it isn't really those fat burning hormones that are kind of scattered and running away, essentially.
Yeah, insulin is the bully on the playground, right? And insulin has a minion, cortisol. And when those two guys get together, it's even worse. They magnify each other when they're in an unhealthy state, right? There's nothing wrong with either one of them. But they're the two hormones that we can control the most with our behavior and our thoughts. Now, you can't do that with a lot of hormones. They're kind of on autopilot. They respond and react as they do based on how our body's built. But insulin and cortisol, you can activate with a thought. You can activate with an action, like exercise or lack of exercise. You can activate it by how you eat. You can activate it by, perception of something. You can be wrong about a perception of a threat, for example, and you can throw it all off when it wasn't even real. Really, it's really influential. And so when they get going and they get out of whack, everything scatters. There's teeter-totters with all the other hormones, how they work together. Everything gets thrown off. They're the core-centric bullies on the playground. Yeah. So
you've mentioned before that people who are happier burn more calories than those who are not. How does that work?
Different hormonal state, right? Different energetics. People, when you eat food that's soft with the same macronutrients as something that's more solid, you burn less calories, right? Because it's easier. So you're talking about, that's where like the argument between protein shakes, like powder protein, and protein food comes in. 30 grams of each, identical amount of protein, dramatic difference in the body. Anything powdered or denatured, protein powder, any kind of flour-based food for baking, wheat, and stuff like that, the body has a hyperinsulin response, right? Even though it's got the same amount of carbs or protein. So back to the protein, 30 grams of powder, 30 grams of steak or chicken or whatever it is. Low insulin impact, huge insulin impact. Can be up to 7 times more than sugar.
Wow.
Certain ones. And so it's a major insulin producer because your body doesn't sense nutrients in the blood like we've been taught. Mm-hmm. It interprets nutrients in our gut. Your food is not fuel. I really don't like it when people say that because it's misleading. It's not fuel. It's information. Your gut is on the outside of your body. If you think about it, tube going down through your body on the way out, it's all on the outside. And your food tells your body, where are you? Where you are. Am I in the north or the south? Is it what time of year is it? What's the conditions of my environment, right? What's growing? What season is it? What's the earth like? That's really what your body's interpreting all that. And when you throw in a processed food from a powder or otherwise, I think it goes like, what the heck is this? Why are you eating this? Right? And doesn't know how to respond. So it like takes out the big guns and says, this got to be something wrong. That's the only thing I can think of, because it happened. It's very well documented, that hyper response.
Which ones are worse in terms of that response for protein powders? I know you mentioned that whey protein is very insulinogenic. So would you put that at the top of one of the highest insulin causing protein powders?
It's the most tested, and we know the most, but there's no reason, because here's what happens. I'll get a bunch of messages. I take pea protein. What about my pea protein? Or I have hemp protein, or I have I'm like, stop. There's no reason to think that other powdered proteins are any different. If you have a reason to think yours is different, let me know. Not just because you buy it. That doesn't count. Right? If there's a reason, but the science makes sense. It's a powdered, denatured product. Concentrate or isolate, doesn't matter, and your body hyper responds. Does it matter what kind of flour that the bread is made of to get the response? No, it doesn't. It could be a crusty bread, could be a soft bread. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that it's made like that in this process. Your body just over responds in our view.
So how would that show if somebody, let's say they have a protein shake and they're testing their glucose, they have a CGM or the blood glucose finger prick, they test before, they test after, like what would they see to kind of see what that protein's doing to them?
Probably not too much, because you can have a very different glycemic response, a glucose response, to your insulin response. Dramatic, because people often will write back to me, no, I tested my insulin and it didn't go up after I ate this. I'm like, you did? How'd you do that? Because you can't finger prick and test your insulin. You have to go to a lab. It's hard. That's why we don't have a whole lot of itemized food numbers for insulin like we do glucose, because you can just test that all day long if you want, or with a continuous, like you said. So, like if you think about the protein, you can have a powder, might not affect your blood sugar that much. There's a lot of things on the American Diabetes Association food list that are approved for glucose, but they crank insulin up. Bad move, right? Really bad. Things like milk, like yogurt, low glycemic. Dairy's been shown to improve diabetes, but the insulin goes up is much more dramatic. So that's a big difference. You might not see a whole lot on your testing with glucose when insulin is spiked. Sometimes it'll even show your glucose go down because there's more insulin.
Right. I've seen that before having sheep's milk yogurt. I've seen my glucose drop from like 75 to like 55 without any other variables. And that's exactly what happened there. I had a huge insulin response, which is fascinating. Do you think there's going to be a continuous insulin monitor or insulin sticks anytime soon to measure that?
Yeah, I think it's industry driven, unfortunately. Right?
Yeah.
It's industry driven. And if they come up with a way to make money on it, like they do now, the glucose monitor, because I don't know, 10 years ago we were playing with that at the different seminars we would go to, if you remember, and that they were really expensive, like $800 and all this crazy stuff to get one of those sensors. Now they're going to be coming out in a couple of years. They'll be as cheap as a glucose monitor, as a regular glucose prick monitor. So I think they will, because now you can get things that you couldn't get before, like you can get vitamin D sent to your home, test and send it back.
Yeah,
great. That used to be a big obstacle, and the price is coming down dramatically. And so you're going to see it. It's going to come out, but it depends on the demand, and that's industry. So we'll see but here's the problem: industry is focused on glucose.
Yeah.
Since 1923, when they discovered what insulin is and does, and they made it open source. They didn't patent it. They gave it to the world. They saw type 1 diabetics that were dying live. Dramatic. Huge advance. But the problem is we translated that same model into type 2. They didn't have much type 2 when this happened. That was just for type 1s. And when they were wasting away, you gave them what they called secretions at the time. They didn't even have the name yet. They would come back to life. They would plump up. Huge issue. I mean, these are kids, 7 years old, parents. I mean, it's a very emotional, great thing. And then as we went, we had a cure now for type 1, and suddenly type 2 starts creeping up. And we said, oh, well, we got insulin to help them, and it translated, and it's the wrong model. It's like going across the street in England and looking the wrong way. What happens when you step out? You get hit by a car, right? Because they drive on the other side. I want to look both ways before I step, and we're not. So that's the problem. The industry is glucose-centric, but insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, they're all insulin-centric.
So what are some blood markers that we could do on a quarterly basis or maybe yearly basis to monitor our insulin health?
You can do a serum insulin, which is a fasting insulin, like you do a fasting glucose. You'll get a number there. You want it as low as possible. There really isn't too low unless you're diabetic, right? Assuming you're not type 1 diabetic or insulin dependent type 2, then I want mine around 2 or 3 if I can do it, definitely under 5. And some of the lab values go up to 25 or 30, which is tremendous. And the reason you want that low is because when you eat, you can have number will go up to 7 times what it is at the baseline from the food. So if you're at 5, you go up to 35. Cool, right? But if you're at 20, still medically normal, now you're up at 140.
Crazy.
It's a dramatic difference.
Yeah.
And you do that throughout the day, you got a problem. And then you end the day high, you roll into the next day high, and that's what starts to build the process. And most Americans, unfortunately, 50% of them eat in a 14-hour window. 14 hours. 15 hours, 15-hour window. 50%, it means basically eating from the time they wake up until the time they go to bed. 90% of them are eating in a 12-hour window. 12 hours from start to finish. That means 10% out there are eating in a less than 12-hour window. Never mind 8 or 6 like some of the people we work with, right?
Yeah.
So we eat, keeping us in a fed state, keeping insulin dominant, and there's a lot of problems with that. It's just not meant to be.
Yeah, and I remember that survey you did on your patient population when you determined that they were snacking, essentially eating 17 to about 23 times per day within the 14 to 15 hours, which is crazy because even, Don, if it's the healthiest snacks in the world, it's still causing that insulin spike and it's still leading to potentially insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So for those who are listening and they're snackers, what would you say to that? Yeah,
snacking causes a lot of issues. That was a big study. That wasn't mine. I repeated it in my population, but when they actually track, not memory, like write down how many times you think you snack, and they actually tracked. It was an expensive big study because you had to monitor people. They ate caloric or flavored food or drink or something 19 to 23 times a day. So what happens then? People who spread out the multiple meals, they have more negative metabolic impact. And these are big population studies. It's not cause and effect, but it's very tight correlation. Like I bank on it and also for weight loss, multiple meals have shown to beat fewer meals. Sometimes they say they're about the same. Okay, I'll take that. If it doesn't show a significant improvement, I don't want to go there because I know about insulin. I know about mTOR, keeping us in the fed state, which we don't want to be in all day long, all night, because then you don't repair. And so we talked about recycling. When your body's not in the fed state, when it's got some time away from food, you start to go into autophagy or the recycling state. And that's very important because one of the things that happens is it starts to, your body cells work better, and cells that have overstayed their welcome will turn off or they'll die. That's where autophagy comes from. Our autophagy does not kill cells. We don't kill our own cells. It basically, you got cells that they have a timeline. And when they get beaten up a little bit and they're not treated well at their job, they go over their retirement age, right? They're working longer than they should. And so here comes autophagy, goes in and fixes that, resets that clock, and they go, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. They die. This is the way they live. So they don't get killed, they die. And what that does is it allows new cells from the stem cells to come in and replace them. And the first things that get broken down in that process is lipid deposits. Lipid deposits. That's like fatty liver, fatty pancreas, and fat in the muscle. Fat's not supposed to be there. At least not triglycerides, because they're made of fat, but a different kind. So triglycerides, and they guck out the works. So the first things that come out is you break down those fat droplets. And where does the fat droplets come from? Being stuck in the fed state. Because remember, they're opposing. Well, one side does, the other side doesn't. They do their opposite. And they can't both be on. People get this mixed up. They can't both be on. You can't be doing in one area of the body a fed action, and the other area of the body a repair action. It's like being in one room and the lights, one light in the ceiling, and being dark over there and light over here. It can't. It's all or nothing. It's just the way it works. And so the fed state stores fat. When it got too much coming in, doesn't know what to do, it starts to store it in places it really shouldn't. The liver, pancreas, other organs, visceral. That's where visceral fat comes from. That's where triglycerides in the muscle comes from. And that's where plaquing comes from, as in Parkinson's, as in Alzheimer's, right? So you have to be in the fed state because that'll reverse. That's what gets broken down. What also gets broken down is scar tissue. When someone goes on a fast, for example, that's some of the first tissue that gets broken down, scar tissue. Because if you ever twisted an ankle or you had a biology or health class, you know that the body will repair that with inflammation, the whole thing, but it over repairs, right? It lays down erratic overabundance of scar tissue. And I used to always wonder, why does that happen? Now I think I know, because when you go into times of not eating in the repair state, it just breaks it down. It trims that out. But if we never get there, we get overproduction of scar tissue. Major issue for surgeries, failed back surgeries, knee surgery, orthoscopic. There's a big problem with that because the body just never cleans it out and it just lays it down. So fed state, you get the fat deposits. Repair state, you take them away. You never get in repair state, there's a problem.